Welcome, my friend, to the Saturday Satsang, the great matter of life and death. The great matter of life and death. Often in our lives we get caught up in the things that are not such great matters, the superficialities of life, and we forget about the great matter of life and death, something fundamental to think about, to contemplate, our life and our death. In Zen, often at the end of a series of sitting, of meditation, there'll be in the Soto Zen school, a way of encouraging us. And Dogen had said, the great Soto Zen master Dogen, had said and written and encouraged his students with this: life and death are of supreme importance. Time passes swiftly. Opportunities are lost. Awaken, awaken. Do not squander your life. Awaken, awaken. Do not squander your life. Do not waste your life. Life and death are of supreme importance. Do not get lost in this world of superficial things. And compared to life and death, isn't everything pretty superficial? Is anything really as important as your own life and your own death? So Dogen wanted to remind us of this, to encourage us to wake up to reality while we still can. Time passes swiftly. Opportunities are lost. Focus on the fundamental things in life, the great matter of life, the most important things, your life and your death. Often we don't want to think about our deaths, do we? You know, my father was a World War II war hero, decorated many times, did amazingly heroic things. He used to dive off these incredibly high cliffs into the ocean in very shallow water where the tide would come in, and when it went out you could see rocks, and he would time the tide so he could live. And he would dive into these things. Amazing, you know, very, very brave person. And yet he was terrified of death. See, when you're diving off a cliff, you could die. When you're doing heroic things in a war, you could die. But there's the possibility of death, not the reality of death. The possibility of death and the reality of death are two very different things. I also, I guess, influenced by him, did things that were kind of death-defying, but there was only the possibility of death, not the reality of death. They're very different. So in my father's life, when his best friend lay dying in the hospital, he wouldn't go to see him. He was so afraid of death, the reality of death, that he wouldn't go to see his very best friend in his last moments. And we thought, like, no one understood this. Because he was so brave in other ways, why wouldn't he go to see his very best friend when he was dying in the hospital? Because that's the reality of death. And so in his own death, in his own process of dying, it was very challenging for him. He had a very hard time with his own death. The process took over a year. And the whole time for him was hell. It was very, very different. He wanted it to be over, and he was afraid of what it was. It's not a good way to die, to not face death, to not understand what death is, to not understand what life and death are. If we don't understand life and death, we've squandered our life, really. No matter what we've done in our life, we've kind of squandered it. If we don't really understand what life and death are, if we don't understand the true nature of life and death. That's why this is a great matter. Very important, of supreme importance, to understand the marrow, the truth, the fundamental reality of life and death. When we live in a dream, we don't understand this, and so we can be very afraid of death. We can be afraid to face it, afraid to think about our own death, when this is so important. This is of supreme importance, and we can avoid even thinking about it, as my father did. And when his best friend was dying, it was because it was real, it was a reminder of death, and he didn't want to be reminded. He had lived his whole life ignoring it, denying it. And yet when it was in his face, he kept trying to deny it. And when he was dying himself, he kept trying to deny it. It doesn't work. It's like an ostrich hiding its head in the sand. This doesn't prevent death from finding you. Hiding your head in the sand and denying death does not prevent death from finding you. It will find you anyway. So it's best to understand it and face it. And many people that I know have died facing their death. My father's mother was one of them. She had no fear of death at all. She faced her death without any fear in this incredibly beautiful way. And she faced her life in the same way. Because if you don't face your own death, you can't face your own life. The two go together. If you can't face your own death, you can't face your own life. You haven't faced your own life. Imagine your life something like this. You grow up and you struggle to have a career, to date different people and find a spouse to be with, and eventually you find one, and you have 3 kids, and you struggle in your career, but eventually you become very successful in your career. And maybe you accomplish some great things. Maybe you find a cure for cancer. You win a Nobel Prize. You write a best-selling book that helps many, many people. So you've accomplished these things. You've attained financial security. Your family love you as you grow older. Your children have children. You have grandchildren. And you're loved by your family and the community, because you've contributed so much to society. And then at some point, you wake up and find out that the whole thing was a dream. You're in a hospital bed and you've been in a coma for 80 years. And everything that you thought that was your life was nothing but a dream. All your accomplishments were just a dream. Would you say that that was a worthwhile life? I mean, after all, in the dream you cured cancer. You wrote a best-selling, book that helped millions of people. You had a loving family, children, grandchildren. It seemed like a pretty good life. It seemed like you accomplished a lot. But if it was just a dream, what did you really accomplish? Where is your family? Where is the cure for cancer? Where is the book? None of it really exists. It's just a dream. It's only in a dream. And the character, the person that did all these things, was just a dream too. You were in a coma, lying in a hospital bed for 80 years. Everything that happened in the dream didn't really happen. So, is that a life? That's not life that we're talking about. The supreme important life, the great matter of life and death, that's real life we're talking about, not a dream life. Not a dream life. We're talking about real life, actual life, the life of reality. That's what's of supreme importance. Your dream life isn't important any more than the person that was in a coma for 80 years and was dreaming these things. His dream life was not really important. It seemed real at the time. In the dream, it seemed totally real, but it wasn't real. In order to understand what our life is, we have to wake up from the dream life. We have to wake up into reality. Now, often people have a hard time understanding what emptiness means. Emptiness. It sounds kind of nihilistic. It's not really. If it were so nihilistic, then Zen monks and awakened beings would not be so happy, would they? If they were nihilists, they wouldn't be so happy. But they are. We are. So emptiness is not at all what we think it is. Essentially, the easiest way to understand it is that it's empty of illusion. It's empty of all our conditioned thoughts. And it's full of reality. It's full of what's really here. It's full of life. Not a dream life, but actual life. So we could say life that is of supreme importance is emptiness. This is true life. Life without conditioned thoughts, free of illusion, actual reality. That's emptiness. And we could also say that death is emptiness, because death is the end of illusion, isn't it? It's the death of illusion. So emptiness is both life and death. In fact, everything is emptiness. Everything is free of illusion. Everything is reality. This is the supreme important life and death that Dogen was speaking of. When we can face our own death, our own physical death, the death of the illusion of the self, the illusion of the separate self, and also the death of the body. At the moment that somebody's dying, this is a wonderful opportunity to wake up to reality. Because we know that the body's going. It's obvious that the body's going. If we can face it and not resist it and not try and hide our heads like an ostrich in the sand and say, I'm dying, and just accept that. Realize that this is happening, that this is a fact of life, that this is reality, that this body is dying. And accept what that means. Accept the reality of death. Reality of death of the body. That this experience of being in a body, which goes along with the experience of I, me, mine, the character, the self, right, depends on this body, lives in this body, and is this body. Well, that's going. That's absolutely, definitely going. That's absolutely, definitely at its end. And in that moment, we can wake up from that dream. if we face our own death. And I don't know if you've known people that have died in this beautiful, almost transparent way, because many people say it's like they're transparent. It's like you can see right through them. It's like there's just this light emanating from them, because they come into their true self in that moment. They come into their true self when there's no reason to hold on to the dream any longer. And death is one of those times. It doesn't happen for most people. But if you've been fortunate enough to be with someone who is dying, who realized their true nature, realized their true self, it's a beautiful thing. I call that the beautiful death. My grandmother was like that. My friend Sarah Joy Nagel was like that. It's a wonderful blessing to be with somebody like that, because we understand the true nature of death then, not as something to fear, not as something that's separate from life, because it's not separate from life. Life and death are one and the same. If we can't face our own death, we can't face our own life. We can only face a dream version of life. And it's not really enough, is it? Is it really enough if our life was a dream? If everything we accomplished was a dream? Is that really enough for you? Don't you want to understand what life actually is? What reality actually is? Don't you want to wake up to the world as it is, to wake up from your dream? This is the great matter of life and death. The great matter of life and death. You may not be on your deathbed with weeks or days or hours until you die, but your body will die. It's just a matter of time. It will die. The moment it was born, it had already started the process to death. So why hide your head in the sand and try and ignore this? Try and push this thought away because you're so afraid of it. Face it. Face your fear of it. And realize that there's nothing to be afraid of. Death is as natural as breathing. The way my grandmother experienced her death was like, it was like walking into the next room. It was just the most natural thing there could possibly be. And it was an amazing teaching for me. I was so grateful for this. I mean, she wasn't a Buddhist. She didn't have really strong religious beliefs. She just faced life and reality firmly, squarely. She wasn't afraid of anything, really, but she wasn't afraid of life, and she wasn't afraid of death. A powerful woman. You know, many families have a patriarch or a matriarch. She was the matriarch of our family. Everybody sort of gathered around her, and she was very wise. She just had enormous wisdom and enormous love. And it totally changed I mean, she died. I was only, I think, not much more than 22 or so when she died. But it was an amazing experience for me, because up until that time I was afraid of death too. I mean, you know, you see movies and people are afraid of dying. I'm dying. Oh no, this is horrible. Someone's dying. And we're just used to, in this conditioning in our society, being afraid of death and thinking death is a terrible thing. We need to save lives. We you know, death is something to be shunned and be afraid of and feared. It's the guy in the hood with the skull face and the sickle cutting you down in death. It's scary to us. We've been trained to be afraid of it, conditioned and programmed to be afraid of something that's completely natural. And for whatever reason, my grandmother wasn't. That conditioning didn't work on her. She didn't accept it. And her lack of acceptance of that conditioning, her openness to truth, was just a mind-blowing teaching for me. I mean, in her just direct being, in her direct life, she was just an example of this. And I think one of the reasons that I was so interested in Zen was dealing with death. I knew at some point, even though I was fairly young when I began, that at some point I was going to have to deal with this. Not just my own death, but the death of my family, my parents and friends and other people. And I saw how much people struggled with this. And I had too before. And I wanted to learn what it was so I didn't struggle and didn't suffer over it anymore. And that did happen. By not turning away from it, by understanding it, by facing it, by not hiding my head in the sand. It's a beautiful opening. It's not something to be afraid of. In fact, awakening itself is called dying before you die. In France, they call sex or orgasm la petite mort. I don't speak French very well, but it means the little death, the small death. So it's not something to be afraid of. It's something to deeply understand. Dying before you die means this illusion of who you are, this I, me, mind, this separate self, and everything that this separate self has done, and all the story of me dies. It dies because you don't believe it. It's not a painful death, although the struggle of your attachment to it, it can be hard to let go. That's the painful part of it. The resistance to letting go into truth, that can be very challenging and painful, because that's what pain is, isn't it? Suffering. It's resistance. Resistance to truth. Resistance to reality. Once you end up loving reality and understand what reality is, you will love it. When you understand what it is, you love it. It's wonderful. And once you understand this, you don't resist anymore. You surrender your belief. You surrender your dream. You surrender your illusion. That's all that this death is. It's just surrendering illusion. It's letting go of illusion. That's what waking up is, enlightenment. It's not a special thing. It's the absence of a special thing. The special thing is the illusion, your dream. It's the absence of that. It's just life as it is, as it's always been, as it always will be. You're just open to this. This is the great matter of life and death. This is what we wake up to, the great matter of life and death. Now often we see awake people and they're happy and have a sense of humor and seem to take life very lightly and not very seriously because they've awakened from this dream. It's the dream they don't take seriously. It's the illusion they don't take seriously. It's an illusion. It's a dream. Why would you take it seriously? Why would you take all these fears and the suffering seriously when you know that they're just a dream? When you directly realize that they're just a dream, you don't. But that doesn't mean that the great matter of life and death are not serious, are not of supreme importance. That awakening itself, that reality itself is not of supreme importance. It is, absolutely. And so, as Dogen said, do not squander this life. Do not waste this life in a dream of me and my life, of me and what I'm going to attain or accomplish, or what I need, or what I don't have yet, and what maybe I'll get. A friend of mine on New Year's Day contacted me, and he was in great physical sickness and pain, and he said he felt like he was dying. And since he's in his 80s, that's a good chance that he probably was. So I said, well, you may be. That may be exactly what's happening. It just felt like that. Because if not in that moment, then pretty soon, you know, that's usually people die in their 80s, you know. Some people make it to 90, very few to 100. So it's normal and natural that somebody in their 80s would die. And yet he was afraid. He was afraid of dying. In the process of dying, he was afraid of dying. Just like my father. And so I said, what are you afraid of? And he was afraid that he hadn't accomplished what he was supposed to accomplish in this life. That it was still unfinished. He wasn't done yet. That's part of a dream, isn't it? Because it's I that I'm not done. It's this separate I, this illusion of a self that's not done. The true self knows absolutely truth. That when the moment of death comes, it doesn't care if you think you're done. It doesn't care what the ego has to say. It doesn't care whether your dreams. It doesn't care about your dreams because it's truth. It comes when it comes. And all your dreams of what you need to accomplish and what you're going to accomplish are dreams. So I said, did Buddha and Jesus accomplish anything? And of course, everyone thinks they accomplished a great deal. Religions are based on them and their teachings. But in fact, for them, they didn't accomplish anything. Because they didn't feel that there was a separate self to accomplish anything. They were awake. There was no separate self to accomplish anything. There was no separate Jesus. There is no separate Buddha. That only exists to people in a dream, because we see beings as separate. In the reality of life, it doesn't exist. Nobody accomplishes anything. There is nobody to accomplish anything. Things happen, yeah. Life happens. The whole totality of life is happening all the time. The materiality of this dream is constantly changing and happening. And it's good in this dream to do good things, to accomplish things, to help people, to be of benefit. Sure, we do this. This is a better way than creating suffering for people, isn't it? It's just part of our natural way, part of our heart and our compassion and love that gives to people, that treats people well, that helps, that gives selflessly to life. We're happy doing this. This is just our natural way. Our natural being is to be like this. But it's not a separate self. It's life. Life. It's just life. This is what life does. If you understand life, if you understand death, you will understand life. If you understand life, you will see that life is is happening in this incredibly beneficial way, perfectly, in every moment. And this is what we wake up to. We need to wake up to realize that life is not about me. I'm about life. This I, it doesn't exist as a separate thing, something separate from life. There is just life. This is truth. This is reality. This is the great matter. This is what we wake up to. It's the end of suffering, because suffering is a dream. Suffering can only happen to an imaginary, separate person, separate self. It doesn't happen to life. It doesn't happen to truth. It doesn't happen to our true self, to our true nature, which is life itself, the totality of all life. That's what we wake up to. Thank you, my friend. May you wake up. Wake up. Do not squander this life.